Victor Harrison thought he had the perfect family until he discovered that his son Tyler was doing the unthinkable with his young stepmother, Chelsea, under his own roof. What began as grief over a lost wife twisted into a web of lust, betrayal, and shocking secrets that no one in their quiet Missouri neighborhood could have imagined. By the time the truth came out, a child was born, a family was destroyed, and the entire town was left speechless. Victor Harrison had lived a quiet, structured life in the outskirts of a small Missouri town. After losing his wife to cancer, he raised his only son, Tyler, alone for nearly 5 years. Victor was a man of routine work: home, sleep, repeat. He was respected in the community for his hard work in construction and for staying out of trouble. Tyler, on the other hand, grew into a private and reserved teenager. He was bright in school, quiet in social situations, and distant at home. The loss of his mother had affected him deeply, but he never truly opened up to anyone about it. People saw the father and son as two individuals stuck in a silent, respectful arrangement, living under one roof but emotionally miles apart. Everything changed when Victor met Chelsea at a contractors' conference in St. Louis. She was different from anyone he had known. Young, confident, and full of energy, Chelsea had a magnetic charm that instantly drew people to her. Victor, who had not dated anyone since his wife's death, felt a spark he didn't expect. They began dating quietly, then quickly escalated to engagement. Within 8 months of their first meeting, they were married. Chelsea moved into the Harrison home, a 2-story house with creaky floors and large windows surrounded by overgrown fields. From the outside, it looked like the perfect place for a new beginning. But Tyler wasn't ready for a new beginning. He came home from college during breaks to find his father's new wife trying to redecorate the living room, changing the meals they used to eat, moving his mother's things into storage. She was polite to him, always smiling, always asking questions, but something about her felt performative. Tyler kept his distance. He barely spoke during dinners and retreated quickly to his room afterward. Chelsea, meanwhile, began inserting herself into Tyler's daily life, offering to do his laundry, bringing him snacks while he studied, even asking for advice on social media posts. To an outsider, it looked like she was trying to bond, but to Tyler, it felt like something else. Victor worked long shifts, often gone before sunrise and returning after dark. The house became eerily quiet during the day. Tyler started taking online classes instead of attending campus, citing exhaustion and burnout. Chelsea encouraged it. She liked having someone in the house. She said she got lonely. Tyler didn't know how to respond to her late-night knocks on his bedroom door, the way she stood too close, the way her eyes lingered when she laughed at his jokes. It made him uncomfortable, but he didn't have the courage to confront it or her. One day, Victor left on a work trip that would keep him out of town for 4 nights. Tyler didn't know this until the morning his father packed a small bag and walked out without much explanation. That same evening, Chelsea made an elaborate dinner. She wore a dress that didn't seem like it belonged in the kitchen. She asked Tyler to sit at the head of the table, where his father usually sat. Tyler hesitated, but followed her instructions. That night changed everything. From that moment on, something unspeakable began. It wasn't just one mistake, one lapse of judgment. It became a pattern, a secret buried behind bedroom doors. Tyler became trapped in it, both terrified and unable to pull away. Days turned into weeks, and what should have been impossible slowly became routine. He started skipping meals with his father. He avoided making eye contact at the dinner table. Chelsea, on the other hand, acted completely normal. She smiled more. She hummed while doing chores. She even began planning for a family vacation and hinted about wanting a baby. Tyler's mental health declined rapidly. He stopped going outside. His grades plummeted. He avoided calls from his friends and ignored messages from his professors. He didn't recognize himself anymore. He was stuck in a nightmare he couldn't explain. And all the while, Victor remained clueless. In his eyes, his young wife was simply trying to connect with his son. He praised her for her efforts, even encouraged her to spend more time with Tyler. But neighbors started noticing strange things. One said she saw Chelsea and Tyler together at the local market, behaving far too comfortably for a stepmother and stepson. Another claimed to see them returning from a hiking trail alone, laughing and brushing against each other. No one wanted to make accusations, but the gossip quietly spread. Still, Victor remained blind to it all. Chelsea's sudden announcement that she was pregnant sent shockwaves through the already unstable home. She delivered the news with joy, placing Victor's hand on her stomach and talking about names and nursery colors. Victor was overjoyed. He saw the baby as a second chance to build the family he had lost. But Tyler froze when he heard the news. Something inside him cracked. He locked himself in his room for hours, refusing to come out, refusing to eat, refusing to speak. The anxiety consumed him. The baby's conception didn't line up with what Chelsea claimed. Tyler knew the truth. He tried to bury it, but it gnawed at him. He knew he had to find out. He needed to know if the child growing inside his stepmother was his. But how could he ask? Who would believe him? How do you admit something you wish had never happened? As the months passed, Chelsea's stomach grew, and so did the tension inside the Harrison home. Tyler's silence deepened. He started writing everything down in a hidden notebook: dates, times, things she said, how it began. He thought maybe someday someone would read it and understand. Maybe one day the truth would come out. But for now, the truth was a prison, and Tyler was its only prisoner. Victor, surrounded by lies, celebrated the upcoming birth, unaware that his home was a ticking time bomb. And the day it would explode was coming sooner than anyone expected. The pregnancy announcement left the household in silence. Victor was ecstatic, already making plans, building a crib in the garage, and calling his friends to share the news. He walked around the house with a renewed energy, talking about names, nursery colors, and parenting books. But while Victor smiled, Tyler remained frozen. His world had started to collapse from the inside out. The fear that the baby might not be his father's was too overwhelming to ignore. He couldn't sleep at night without replaying every moment in his mind, counting back the days, doing the math over and over again, trying to convince himself that it wasn't possible. But the numbers never changed. The conception date matched the exact period when things between him and Chelsea had started. Tyler stopped going to class entirely. He deactivated all his social media accounts, stopped answering calls from his professors, and began spending every hour locked in his room. His eyes looked sunken, and his skin grew pale. Victor noticed the change but chalked it up to stress or burnout. He didn't push. He simply assumed Chelsea would help bring Tyler back into the light. That assumption would prove to be a mistake. Chelsea remained calm through it all. She didn't push Tyler, didn't corner him, didn't act nervous. In fact, her behavior seemed even more relaxed than before. She glided around the house humming lullabies, posting pictures of her growing belly on Facebook, and texting her friends excited updates about the pregnancy. To outsiders, she looked like a glowing young mother-to-be, excited and content. But behind her closed bedroom door, everything was different. She left small notes in Tyler's room. She smiled at him in ways that made his stomach turn. She never spoke about the past but never acted like it was over either. Her silence was a message in itself, one that Tyler couldn't escape. Then came the doctor's appointment. Victor invited Tyler to come along, thinking it would be a good bonding experience. Tyler refused, making up an excuse about homework, but curiosity burned inside him. He waited until they left, then logged into Chelsea's laptop, which she had carelessly left open. A message thread with one of her friends was still on the screen. Tyler scrolled through it with shaking hands. The messages were casual at first, talk of baby clothes and cravings, but then a chilling sentence caught his eye. It's all about control. Victor thinks it's his. That's all that matters. Tyler read it again and again, the words searing into his brain. That one line shattered what little denial he had left. It wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a game to her, a manipulation. She knew what she was doing, and she didn't care. Tyler felt like his lungs had collapsed. He closed the laptop and sat on the floor of the kitchen for hours, unable to move. That night, when Victor and Chelsea returned, Tyler avoided them, but he could hear them talking in the next room. Chelsea was excited. She talked about the baby's heartbeat, the shape of its nose in the ultrasound. Victor was laughing, happy, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside his son's mind. Tyler stared at the ceiling that night, his thoughts racing. He knew the baby could be his, but how could he prove it? What would happen to his father if he found out? Would anyone believe him? Days passed. Tyler began writing everything down. Every day, every incident, every sign. He filled the pages of a notebook and hid it under the floorboard of his closet. He started researching paternity tests, trying to understand how they worked. One day, he stumbled across an article that explained non-invasive prenatal testing. It could be done while the baby was still in the womb. He printed it out, circled key sentences, and kept it hidden with the notebook. The weight of the secret began to eat him alive. He barely ate. He stayed awake until sunrise and then slept through most of the day. One evening, Victor found Tyler's door open and stepped inside. The room was dark and smelled like sweat and closed windows. Clothes were strewn everywhere, and notebooks were stacked on the desk. Tyler was curled up in bed, eyes red, staring at the wall. Victor asked if everything was okay. Tyler didn't respond. Victor assumed it was depression. He told Chelsea he was worried. Chelsea nodded sympathetically and told him not to worry. She would talk to Tyler. But the next day, Tyler's door was shut tight again, and he didn't come out for meals. He was inside reading medical forums, trying to figure out if he could secretly submit DNA. He had even considered stealing something of Chelsea's, her toothbrush, a hair strand, but he didn't have the courage. He feared being caught, feared what she would do if she found out. Then came the breaking point. Tyler woke up one morning to find a framed ultrasound photo placed on his desk. No note, no explanation, just the photo, smiling at him like a taunt. Chelsea had left it there. He was sure of it. That was her way of reminding him who really held the power in the house. He snapped. He stormed out of the house and drove for hours. He ended up at the campus counselor's office even though he had dropped out months ago. He sat down and poured out everything without naming names. He talked about guilt, manipulation, confusion, and the pregnancy. He didn't reveal it was his stepmother, didn't say it was happening at home. But the counselor, disturbed by the intensity of the story, made a confidential report to the campus safety department. The report made its way to the local sheriff's office, though there wasn't enough detail to act on. Still, a deputy was dispatched to do a wellness check at the Harrison home. Victor was surprised but cooperative. He invited the deputy in, offered coffee, and answered all questions with a smile. Chelsea sat beside him, her hands resting on her pregnant belly, talking about prenatal vitamins and nursery themes. The deputy left with nothing to report, but inside, Tyler was watching from upstairs. He saw the officer leave. He saw the door close. And he knew, without a doubt, that no one was coming to help him. So he began collecting his own evidence. He backed up the photos and messages from his old phone. He started leaving voice memos describing everything. And he waited for the right moment. Because deep down, he knew, the truth always finds its way to the surface. And when it did, nothing in that house would ever be the same again. Victor had always believed he could trust his home, trust the people in it, and trust that what was behind closed doors was honest. But everything began to unravel the day he couldn't find his phone. It was a minor thing at first, a misplaced device, probably left on the workbench or in the garage. He looked for it calmly at first, calling it from the landline, checking under couch cushions, even scanning the yard. But the phone didn't turn up. Frustrated, Victor asked Chelsea and Tyler if they'd seen it. Chelsea shrugged and offered to help search. Tyler didn't respond, only giving a quiet shake of the head and disappearing back into his room. Out of necessity, Victor grabbed Tyler's old smartphone, which was still lying in the junk drawer. It hadn't been used in weeks, but it still powered on. He just needed it for one call. But as he scrolled through the contacts, something strange caught his eye. There was a folder labeled Private in the photo gallery. It wasn't hidden particularly well. He clicked on it out of curiosity. Maybe it had old photos, memories from high school, or pictures of the family. But what he saw made his hands tremble. There were photos, dozens of them, and none of them innocent. Images of Chelsea in her nightgown standing outside Tyler's room. Screenshots of text messages, with conversations that chilled Victor to the core. Short video clips, clearly taken inside their home, showing moments that should have never happened. The worst part wasn't just what was in the images, it was that they had dates and times attached. The timestamps showed a consistent pattern. Daily, repeated, ongoing. Victor sat at the kitchen table in shock, the phone lying on the surface like a detonated bomb. He felt his chest tighten. His hands shook as he scrolled further. His eyes scanned the messages, trying to understand if there was some mistake, some other explanation. But the evidence was clear. The affair had been happening for months. And it wasn't just an affair, it was something deeper, more disturbing, something Victor couldn't name out loud. He didn't say anything to either of them that night. At dinner, he watched them carefully. Chelsea talked as usual, mentioning a baby store in town. Tyler barely spoke, chewing slowly and avoiding eye contact. Victor saw every movement differently now. Every glance, every hesitation, every pause seemed laced with secrets. His house felt foreign, his family unrecognizable. The next day, Victor drove to a hardware store under the pretense of picking up supplies. Instead, he purchased 2 small motion-activated cameras and a set of memory cards. He returned home and installed one in the hallway and another in the living room, carefully hiding them in vents and behind bookshelves. He told no one. He waited. 3 nights later, the hallway camera triggered at 1:13 a.m. Victor stayed up to review the footage, his breath catching in his throat. The video showed Chelsea walking down the hallway barefoot, wearing a long shirt, and quietly slipping into Tyler's room. She didn't leave until 4:52 a.m. Victor felt numb. No more doubts. No more speculation. He exported the footage, copied the files onto a flash drive, and drove it straight to the sheriff's office the following morning. He didn't speak to Chelsea. He didn't confront Tyler. He just left the house and didn't return until late that night, pretending everything was normal. But now, the silence at dinner had a different edge. Victor wasn't blind anymore. He was watching everything, documenting everything. At the sheriff's office, the footage and the phone evidence sparked immediate concern. An investigation was opened under complete confidentiality. Because Tyler was barely 19 at the start of the alleged incidents, questions were raised about the legality of Chelsea's involvement and the possibility of coercion. Investigators decided to act quietly, collecting more information before making any arrests. Victor agreed to wear a recording device in the house, hoping to catch conversations that could further confirm the relationship. He was instructed not to change his behavior, not to raise suspicion. It was the hardest role he'd ever played. He had to eat dinner with them, pretend to sleep while the woman he married visited his son at night. He had to smile during conversations about the baby, knowing everything was a lie. Then, the DNA testing process began. Under the direction of the court, Victor, Tyler, and Chelsea were all required to submit samples. Chelsea didn't object. She acted confused at first, then defensive, but eventually complied. She joked about the test, claiming it was unnecessary, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Tyler looked pale during the process, trembling slightly as the swab touched his mouth. Victor didn't sleep the night before the results were delivered. He sat alone in his truck outside the sheriff's office, gripping the steering wheel tightly. When the detective handed him the envelope, he didn't open it right away. He stared at it, knowing that whatever was inside would destroy whatever was left of his family. When he finally unfolded the paper, the truth hit him like a tidal wave. The child wasn't his. The test confirmed a 99.9% likelihood that Tyler was the biological father of Chelsea's unborn baby. Victor couldn't breathe. He stumbled back to his car, his vision blurred by disbelief and fury. His mind spun in 1,000 directions, none of them making sense. He had built a life based on loyalty, hard work, and trust. And now it was all ash. The arrests came the following day. Chelsea was taken from the house in handcuffs, still pregnant, her expression blank. Tyler didn't resist. He was pale and silent, like he had already surrendered long ago. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence as police cruisers lined the street. Victor didn't watch them go. He packed a small bag and drove out of town without telling anyone. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't stay in that house any longer. Every corner of it was soaked in betrayal. Every room held memories that now felt like poison. The local news reported the arrests within hours. Stepmother and teen son accused of disturbing relationship. Headlines spread quickly. The town buzzed with gossip. People who once smiled at Victor in the grocery store now whispered behind his back. The investigation was no longer just about infidelity. It had become a story of manipulation, abuse, and a broken family spiraling into darkness. Victor, a man who once believed in second chances and simple truths, was now left with nothing but questions. The footage, the photos, the messages, the test, all of it real, all of it happening right under his roof, and all of it too much to bear. The arrests shook the entire community. News vans arrived within hours, parking outside the Harrison home with their long lenses and flashing lights. Reporters shouted questions as Chelsea was escorted out in handcuffs, her pregnant belly obvious beneath a loose sweatshirt. Tyler was taken separately, his head down, his hands trembling as he was placed into the back of a different cruiser. Neighbors stood outside, watching silently, many in disbelief. Whispers rippled through the town like wildfire. No one could believe what had been happening in the quiet, respectable Harrison household. Victor stayed hidden. He didn't watch them get taken away. He didn't stand on the porch or follow the reports on TV. He couldn't. He sat in his truck miles away, parked beneath the same tree where he used to take Tyler fishing when he was a boy. He stared at the river, numb, struggling to make sense of it all. His wife, his son, his home, everything had been built on a lie. And now it had collapsed into something so dark, so twisted, that he didn't even know who he was anymore. Back at the sheriff's department, the interrogation rooms lit up. Tyler remained quiet for most of it. His lawyer sat beside him, occasionally leaning in to whisper something, but Tyler said almost nothing. He looked exhausted, worn down, like someone who hadn't slept in months. When pressed gently by investigators, he finally began to speak. He didn't fight the truth. He didn't deny it. He told them it started when his father was gone on a work trip, that it wasn't planned, that it happened once and then again, until it became something he couldn't stop. He admitted everything: the relationship, the frequency, the timing of the pregnancy. He even mentioned how Chelsea would manipulate him, how she left notes in his room, how she made it seem like it was their secret, something they shared, something forbidden but exciting. He described how it twisted his sense of right and wrong, how it made him question his own identity, how it consumed him until he couldn't function anymore. There was no emotion in his voice, just emptiness. Chelsea, on the other hand, had a very different demeanor. During her interrogation, she appeared calm, even cheerful at times. She spoke about Victor lovingly, describing how much he wanted a baby, how she had tried to bring the family together. When asked about Tyler, she called it a misunderstanding, something taken out of context, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The videos, the messages, the test results, none of it could be explained away. She changed her tone gradually, becoming colder, more detached. She stopped talking altogether when it became clear that nothing she said would undo what had already been proven. The courtroom was filled when the hearings began. Journalists packed the benches. Former classmates of Tyler's showed up, some out of curiosity, others in disbelief. Chelsea's swollen belly made the scene more grotesque. It was no longer just a story about betrayal. It had become a case of psychological control, statutory violations, and a family destroyed by something that defied comprehension. The judge ordered a court-supervised DNA test to confirm the results previously submitted. Medical staff performed the test, and the sample was handled with care, processed under full legal scrutiny. A few weeks later, the official court document arrived, confirming what everyone already knew. Tyler was the biological father of Chelsea's unborn child. Victor's face was pale as he stood outside the courtroom, the document in his hands. Reporters circled him, flashing cameras and throwing questions, but he said nothing. He turned and walked away, leaving the paper behind on a bench. He had no more words. The public exploded with opinions. Some blamed Chelsea entirely, calling her a predator, a manipulator who had preyed on a grieving family. Others blamed Tyler, suggesting he should have stopped it or told someone sooner. But the truth was far more complicated than either narrative. It wasn't just about right and wrong. It was about silence, manipulation, and the slow erosion of boundaries until everything blurred into something unrecognizable. Tyler was placed in a county detention center, awaiting trial. His mental health evaluations showed signs of trauma, deep guilt, and emotional instability. He didn't fight the charges. He told his lawyer he was willing to accept whatever punishment came his way. He said he didn't care about the outcome. He only wanted to forget. Chelsea's pregnancy was nearing its final trimester by now. She had been transferred to a secure medical facility under law enforcement supervision. Doctors monitored her closely. Though she remained mostly silent, her behavior fluctuated, sometimes sweet and cooperative, other times erratic and withdrawn. She refused to see Victor. She asked for updates about the baby, but nothing else. Victor had filed for divorce immediately after the arrests. The paperwork went through quietly. No contest, no hearings. Chelsea didn't object. It was done in weeks. He changed the locks on the house, removed every photo from the walls, burned the bedding and curtains she had picked out. Then he listed the property for sale. He couldn't walk through those hallways without feeling suffocated. The house was sold quickly, cash offer, no questions asked. Victor packed his belongings into a rented trailer and disappeared. He left no forwarding address. Some said he moved to Colorado. Others believed he changed his name entirely. No one knew for sure. He left town without a word. The only thing he didn't take was the crib he had built in the garage. It remained there untouched, covered in dust, a small reminder of a life that had never truly existed. Meanwhile, the baby was born in early spring, a boy, healthy, quiet, delivered at a state hospital under heavy security. Chelsea was not allowed to hold him. The infant was taken by Child Protective Services the moment he opened his eyes. He was placed in emergency foster care, his fate uncertain. When news of the birth reached Tyler, he refused to speak. He sat in his cell for hours, staring at the wall, saying nothing. When his lawyer asked if he wanted to petition for parental rights, he shook his head. He wanted no connection to the child. To him, the baby wasn't hope, it was a reminder. A permanent, breathing consequence of everything that had gone wrong. The court began discussing long-term arrangements for the baby. There were no relatives willing to step in. Victor had already submitted legal documents renouncing any guardianship claims. He wanted no involvement, no visits, no contact. His final words in court were written in a letter and read aloud by his lawyer. It simply said, "Let the past die, for everyone's sake." The scandal slowly faded from public memory. Another crime took the spotlight. Another family's tragedy filled the headlines. But for those who lived it, nothing was ever the same. A home that once held a grieving father and a quiet son became the center of one of the most disturbing cases the town had ever seen. A marriage that promised healing brought nothing but destruction. A baby that should have symbolized life became the final weight on a broken family. And in the silence that followed, only one thing remained undeniable. The truth had come out, and it had destroyed everything in its path. Months passed, and the dust began to settle, but the wreckage remained. The Harrison case, once the center of every local conversation and news broadcast, slowly faded into the background of the town's memory. Another scandal, another tragedy, another heartbreak had since taken its place. But for those directly affected, time did not bring peace. It only deepened the silence and sharpened the pain. Victor lived alone now, far from the county that once knew him. After selling the house and filing the final divorce paperwork, he moved to a quiet, isolated cabin in northern Colorado. He didn't tell friends or relatives where he was going. He changed his phone number and deleted all his social media. The few remaining items he brought with him, some clothes, tools, and a few old photographs of Tyler as a boy, remained untouched in a box at the back of his closet. He didn't open them. He couldn't. He spent most days fishing, walking, or simply staring out the window at the mountain peaks. At night, he battled the thoughts that refused to go away. Every detail of the betrayal replayed in his head like an endless loop. The pregnancy, the videos, the DNA test, the police cars outside his house. The moment he realized his wife and son had been lying to him under his own roof. Some nights, he drank until he couldn't think at all. Other nights, he sat in silence, questioning everything about himself, his judgment, his role as a father, his blindness to what had been happening. He sometimes wondered about the child, his grandchild, his son's son, or more disturbingly, his ex-wife's son by his own son. The thought made him sick. He tried not to think about it, but it always came back. He hadn't asked where the baby was placed, and he didn't want to know. As far as he was concerned, it didn't exist. Back in Missouri, Chelsea had been moved from jail to a long-term psychiatric facility after a full mental evaluation. The court had determined she was mentally fit to stand trial but showed signs of emotional instability and manipulative tendencies. She remained under strict observation, her contact with the outside world tightly controlled. Her behavior shifted, often sometimes cooperative, sometimes volatile. She rarely spoke of Victor or Tyler, but occasionally she asked for updates on the child. Those requests were denied. Her legal team fought to reduce her sentence, arguing that her actions stemmed from trauma, loss, and untreated psychological conditions. The prosecution pushed for the maximum penalties, painting her as a calculating woman who preyed on a grieving family. The court hearings dragged on for months, but Chelsea showed little emotion. She remained seated, expressionless, as attorneys argued over the direction of her future. Tyler's case was more complicated. He had pled guilty to several charges, including unlawful conduct and obstruction. The court considered his cooperation, his mental health state, and his youth. Multiple evaluations described him as emotionally manipulated and psychologically compromised. Letters from former teachers and family friends spoke of a shy, quiet boy who had been lost since his mother's death. But the law could not ignore what had been done. Ultimately, Tyler was sentenced to several years in a psychiatric correctional facility rather than a standard prison. There he remained under supervision, receiving counseling and treatment. He barely spoke. He refused therapy for weeks until one counselor finally reached him. Tyler spoke in fragmented thoughts, admitting guilt, confusion, and pain. He blamed himself. He said he should have stopped it, should have said something sooner, should have resisted. But when asked how it started, his voice would always drop to a whisper, and he'd shake his head, refusing to continue. He never asked to see Chelsea. He never asked about the baby. His only request was that no one send him letters. No visits, no photos, nothing. The child, meanwhile, was placed into a foster system under a confidential identity. Few knew where he was or who cared for him. The court worked quietly to find a suitable family, one that would raise the baby without the shadow of the past hanging over him. He was given a new name, new birth certificate, and placed in a distant county, far from where the scandal had unfolded. The foster family was told only the bare minimum. The child's mother and biological father were not fit to raise him, and the state was working toward full termination of parental rights. There was no mention of the headlines, no explanation of the dark origins. As far as his new caregivers were concerned, he was just a baby in need of a future. No one told him the story of where he came from. The town of Millridge, where the Harrisons had once lived, eventually moved on. The house, sold quickly and cheaply, became a rental property. The new tenants never asked about the history. The neighbors never told them. The whispers died down. The sidewalks grew quiet again. People planted new flowers, painted new fences, and filled their lives with smaller, more manageable concerns. But for the few who still remembered, there were things that wouldn't go away. One neighbor, the one who first suspected something strange between Chelsea and Tyler, sometimes passed by the house and paused at the edge of the driveway. She would stare at the window where Chelsea used to sit in the evenings, sipping tea. She had once considered calling Victor, long before the arrests, but convinced herself it was none of her business. She still wondered what might have changed if she had spoken up sooner. Another neighbor, a retired school teacher, still kept a copy of the newspaper clipping about the DNA test. He read it every now and then, not out of fascination, but as a reminder. A reminder that evil didn't always show up in the form of strangers or masked intruders. Sometimes it crept into the heart of a home, wearing the face of someone you loved. The Harrison case became a cautionary tale, a grim, painful story that no one wanted to repeat but no one could fully forget. It was never discussed openly anymore, but its shadow lingered in the air like an unfinished sentence. Some wounds don't bleed on the surface, they fester in silence. And in that silence, Victor remained hidden in the mountains, Tyler remained locked away in a state hospital. And Chelsea, once the smiling young bride, remained in a place where even mirrors refused to reflect the full truth. The baby, innocent and unaware, was the only one with a real chance at a new life. The rest were left to live with what they had done, and what they had become.